Hi everyone, and thanks again for joining us on another episode of It Starts With Plastic Free. How you going, Corey?
Good, mate. I'm quite interested in this topic today.
This is exciting because we both love our food and we both love being in the kitchen, and we're talking about plastics in the kitchen and the worst things you can do with plastics in the kitchen. And I'm always it's been sort of in the back of my mind when I see things in my kitchen at home, and you've got that background noise going, is that going to be a potential hazard here? And as we've got into this business, we've understood the issues with plastic even further.
Yeah.
But you found an interesting article.
Well, even just reading this article, I was having a bit of a meltdown about the plastic chopping board that I reckon I washed and dried last night. So I'm sure my wife will tell me that she washed and dried it.
A few microplastics in that one.
I think so. That might be going elsewhere after reading this stuff. So thanks to Stored Naturally, an interesting company in Australia that's written this article, 5 worst things you can do with plastic in your kitchen, and we'll pretty much talk through this because it is really interesting what they've gathered here. I think one of the key first points before we go through the five worst things is they cover here that some of the chemicals used in plastic have our well-known BPAs and BPS, now they're calling them, and the likes, and we've heard plenty of them, but there's 6,000 dangerous chemicals used in the manufacture of plastic. And we plan to talk about that in a future episode. What are a lot of those key chemicals? Yep. The real critical point here is they're not chemically part of the plastic. So they leach. Those chemicals will always leach out of the plastic, especially under heat and the likes, which we'll go through. What we want to sort of cover here is we understand that plastic is not stable, and we need to understand what conditions is it most likely to leak chemicals out into our food and
there are different plastics that can do different things. This was a good one. And look, I'm always, from my previous business, understanding what chemicals are in polymers and plastics. It freaks me out even more when I hear things like that, because it is a reminder about the instability of some of those chemicals. Yeah, and
it says here, and again, a single plastic may consist of 5 to 30 chemicals. Then you've got some items that have a lid and a this and a that, and then suddenly you're up to 100 chemicals. It's very hard to track which ones are potentially causing us damage, which ones aren't. I think the lesson through this is get rid of them.
We'll start sharing what these risks are.
So
what are some of these things that
point number
we
one,
shouldn't do?
One of the worst things we can do with plastic in our kitchen is allow exposure to sunshine. So very simply, it accelerates the chemical components in it, and they are released faster, which again goes back to that like plastic bottle in your car. You just don't do that.
Yeah, the breakdown of plastic, a lot of them are UV instable.
Yep.
So correct.
Yeah. UV light is considered to be the most stressful to plastic and causes the plastic to release. Yeah.
So the instability of plastic with UV light is a concern.
Yeah. Number 2, heat plastic in the dishwasher, oven and steamer. I remember in my younger days putting plastic dishes in the dishwasher on hot, and they'd come out slightly misshaped. And good for the next meal.
Yeah,
I think
warped a little bit.
I think
the lid didn't fit on it after that.
Absolutely, I think we're learning that is not a good path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And look, the thing is also, after you wash plastic dishes, even for this whole store food, don't put food in them while they're still warm.
Yes.
Let them go back to room temperature.
Yeah, and you got a few points here, Phil.
Look, this was a really important one. I think about the obvious ways that we can avoid plastic. But things like some of the takeaway coffee cups, some of the cheaper ones, you can actually feel the plastic lining on the inside. I know they're paper, but there's a plastic lining on the inside, or it's an acrylic film, and you've got to be careful with that. And that's the same with some of the food trays that are out in the marketplace. And you can actually feel the lining inside. Plastic gloves when you're preparing food. Now, my wife and myself, particularly handling some foods, we've got these nitrile plastic gloves, or they're rubber. Yeah. But plastic gloves, you don't know. You might think, okay, I'm stopping my hands from smelling when handling fish, etc. But what is it doing with the absorption into food? These are little ones. And plastic utensils. Well, I mean, most plastic forks and knives now should be on the list with straws.
Yeah,
we go on the wooden ones, but they're still out there. cutting up foods on plastic cutting boards, as you just mentioned then. I stopped that a while back.
Yep.
I remember running my hand over the plastic and I thought, shit, this is not smooth anymore, it's rough.
I'm eating this.
And that's going back into my gut, which is not good. And also, the plastic containers for leftover foods, which we discussed.
Yeah.
There's other ways, and glass is obviously the better way of doing that. But these are the low-hanging fruits that we should be aware of, particularly with kids. How many Tupperware and all these sort of products that are going into school lunchboxes or school bags holding food, and every day, and they're absorbing food.
Yeah.
So that's absorbing plastic into the food.
Yes.
So they're the common ones with plastics and what happens when you heat them.
Yeah, spot on. Number 3, scratching plastic. So doing things in the kitchen that are likely to scratch the plastic that you do have. So dishwashers are surprisingly harmful to plastic. Putting
abrasive.
any sort of plastic in dishwashers, even hand washing with like a bottle brush or a really, what's it called, steel wool or anything like that, damages it. Chopping boards, as we mentioned, 1,000 cuts on a chopping board, and suddenly it's starting to release a lot of chemicals.
Yeah, and that's the problem with microplastics. It's not what you see; it's actually what you've created. So that's a classic.
Absolutely. So again, statistic here: plastics that have been scratched leach far greater amount of chemicals, up to 5 times more, including the usuals. So something we want to stay away from.
And then that brings you to the piece about how we buy food.
Yeah.
That we bring back into the home, into the kitchen. And the classic is buying food that's wrapped in plastic. Now, you made that comment before about getting your cucumber.
Yes.
And you get it, it's already got the cling film on it. Whereas I won't do that. I like to go to the vegetable or fruit and veg and then pick the fruit and put it in hopefully a bio bag, which I know most retailers have got these days. But even if you've got to put it in a plastic bag, it's temporary compared to something that's been wrapped in fridges and in storage and trucks for the days before it's there. I sometimes see these chopped up vegetables you can put in stews and soups. They're raw with no skin on them.
Yes. And
wrapped in plastic and styrene bases, and what's that absorbing into the foods?
Yep.
So they're those chemicals that we really need to be aware of.
Yeah, and there are those, we've spoken about them before, the reusable bags that you can buy that you take shopping with you. Fresh produce bags, which eliminates that problem as well. Definitely.
And I don't know why paper's not used. The old paper bags that I've even seen the old Brady Bunch episodes where you'd come back, and I know they're not as strong, but papers, it's recyclable now, and it's less harmful than this. When we're holding foods.
Yeah, I know there's certainly an argument around like mushrooms are in paper bags. Then I have read an argument around actually cucumber does need to be, or is packaged in plastic because it will last so much longer in that tight film. So there's an argument of food waste versus longevity. But here we're talking about health, the worst things you can do with plastic in your kitchen.
Look, and maybe, the thought about how we buy foods as well. Do we buy bulk and store it, or just buy what you need so you're not having to have those challenges?
Yeah, spot on. So number 5, buy food that has been in plastic for an extended period of time. So I've always been, this is another interesting one, like canned soup. So consumption of 1 serving of canned soup daily over 5 days was associated with more than 1,000% increase in urinary BPA. And that was a study from 2011.
Wow.
I'm sure some of the plastic linings in canned soups where I've seen no BPA advertised on the front of a can in terms of the lining, but when we talk about there being 6,000 chemicals, have we just switched from BPA to a different lining?
And are they being measured?
Yeah.
BPA is obviously one because the EPAs are looking at them when they end up in landfill, but these chemicals, this is more of a health issue now, not so much environmental.
Yep.
And that's often overlooked, which is probably for me is more important.
Yeah.
They were living safe.
Spot on. And on, just enforcing that, this great line here, which I'll read out word for word. Unfortunately, it is unlikely these estrogenic migrating bioaccumulating chemicals will ever be fully tested or regulated. 6,000 different and highly toxic chemicals used in plastics that come into contact with food. Just, you can't possibly test all those 6,000, and they're always creating new ones.
So the things that to avoid, that you can avoid, is where you can use glass in the kitchen to store food. Ideal in the kitchen, it's perfect in the fridge, and you can normally heat with a lot of glassware as well.
Spot on.
So bake and cook where you can in those items. Avoid plastics in microwaves as well. I hate microwaves full stop, but avoid that. Chopping boards.
Yeah.
Plastic chopping boards should be a thing of the past. If you're going to go to a timber carving board, it's fine. I tend to only use my carving board at home as timber for things like breads, dry materials, but don't put wet foods like meats and fish on there because of the absorption.
Yep.
But we bought a stone one.
Yeah.
And you get a stone one, and that way, it cleans it down, it's polished, and they last forever, nice and heavy, but you can just see there's nothing absorbed in there. It stays wet in there, and that avoids that. But plastics, you get rid of. Reusable coffee cups, they're great now. I love seeing people taking their coffee cup to a location for a takeaway, and it gets filled, and most cafes are accommodating to that because they know that this is a consumer conscious issue as well. And let's give Stored Naturally a bit of a plug. They've got a product they call, which is a fresh produce enhancer.
Yep.
If you get onto their website and check it out, there might be a few things in there that is an alternative to how to store your food fresh without having it in plastic. But these, Corey, there's some great takeaways here.
Yeah.
Plastic in the kitchen, around food. If you've got kids, young kids, the elderly, but even ourselves, longevity, all these chemicals in our bodies, and this is where there haven't been a lot of studies on the impact. But I keep saying this is the tip of an ugly iceberg that's going to start to come in the next 10 years. So avoid it.
Yeah, there's been a lot of studies on BPA and 3 of the chemicals here that we've referenced. But when I hear that there's 6,000, there's so much unknown there. I think exactly. Let's minimise our risk with these sorts of tips.
If you've got any tips or thoughts or comments about avoiding plastic in the kitchen and around food, please throw them our way. Don't forget to subscribe. Remember to make the switch to Australian-made plastic-free wet wipes. I'm going to throw that one in. Corey, until the next episode of It Starts with Plastic Free, make sure your kitchen's plastic-free. We'll see you then.